Eleanor Sterling's marriage to Charles Sterling was a testament to extreme success and emotional discipline, its cost measured in spiritual depletion. The residence, a vast Upper East Side apartment, was aesthetically impeccable, every fixture and artwork reflecting the meticulous order Charles valued. Charles, a formidable figure in mid-cap finance, viewed life strictly through the lens of gain and loss. Eleanor, navigating the world of contemporary art in her Soho gallery, dealt in the currency of feeling and color, a currency Charles had long since declared obsolete. The outward perfection was an exhausting, sustained lie. Over the past decade, Eleanor's inner vibrancy had been slowly extinguished, replaced by a chronic emptiness born of Charles's relentless disinterest. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment Charles stopped seeing her as a partner and started viewing her as a high-value, stationary asset. Perhaps it was when he began discussing every aspect of their life, from career moves to holiday destinations, by saying they had maximized the potential of the relationship. Their dinners were the most fragile moments of this illusion. Eleanor would place the elaborate salmon dish before Charles, but the silence between them persisted, amplified by the high ceilings. Charles stirred his food, his focus locked onto his tablet. "Adequate," he would pronounce, using his sterile corporate jargon. Eleanor felt that single word ruthlessly defined their decade, sufficient from the outside, utterly starved within. The atrophy was internal. 6 months prior, the urge to paint, the visceral need that had sustained her youth, had abruptly vanished. She meticulously packed away her brushes, treating the act like a solemn funeral rite for a deceased part of herself. Charles had been oblivious. "Good," he had mumbled, focused on his terminal. "More time for the gallery, then." The new Rothko acquisition should distract you. Distraction was Charles's only prescription for existential voids. The nights were a siege of loneliness. Charles was frequently late, and when present, his mind was often across continents, entrenched in complex financial patterns. When he did touch her, it was a perfunctory gesture, a shoulder squeeze in passing, a kiss that tasted faintly of expensive scotch and exhaustion. Eleanor felt less like a wife and more like an exquisitely maintained object whose emotional contract had lapsed without notice. The hunger for connection, for someone to truly see the woman behind the meticulous social mask, had become a constant, profound ache. It was this ache that compelled her to attend an academic symposium on sustainable design, hosted by Columbia University, an intentional act of rebellion against the financial sterility of her world. There, she met Kyle Sterling. Kyle, an architect, spoke of maximizing light and human interaction in space. He used the word vulnerability to describe a building's exposed foundation, arguing that imperfection was essential to beauty. Eleanor realized with a jolt of recognition that she hadn't heard the word vulnerability applied to anything real in years. Their initial conversations were sparring matches about art philosophy. Crucially, Kyle did not ask about her net worth. He asked why she stopped painting. He offered not distraction, but focused curiosity. The message arrived late one Tuesday night, well past the hour Charles would attend to his non-essential phone. From Kyle, "Minimalism is often honesty disguised as simplicity. I'll take that challenge. Lunch tomorrow?" 1 p.m. sounds perfect. Eleanor stared at the message. It was a simple lunch invitation, but she knew it was a step over the line. The wedding band on her finger felt like an oppressive weight. She walked to the window, the city lights reflecting the dangerous excitement in her eyes. She knew the moment she accepted, she would not tell Charles. That single omission would be the foundational lie of her new, treacherous life. She replied, "I accept the challenge." 1 p.m. is perfect. Hitting send felt like stepping off a cliff. The mixture of fear and exhilarating relief was intoxicating. That night, she didn't sleep soundly. She felt the terrifying, wonderful possibility of reclaiming her lost self. The next day, the 3-hour lunch with Kyle was a flood of oxygen into her starved emotional life. He saw the tension, the sadness, and didn't try to fix it, he simply engaged. When she returned to her gallery, the usual noise of the city felt muted, replaced by a low, humming awareness of Kyle. That evening, Charles was home watching the market updates. "How was today?" Charles asked, his eyes remaining on the screen. Eleanor spoke with a steady voice. "Very busy. Long lunch with a new client. Charles merely nodded. How easily the lie slipped out. It horrified her that her marriage was so easily deceived, but it also granted her an exquisite, potent freedom. Lying was terrifying, but the ensuing relief was exhilarating. That night, lying beside the oblivious Charles, Eleanor knew this was only the beginning of her silent rebellion. The lunch was not an isolated event. It became a dangerous routine. Eleanor and Kyle continued to meet under the thin pretense of collaboration. The early coffee dates before the gallery opened morphed into clandestine, late-afternoon sessions. Their messages transitioned from professional notes to dangerously intimate thoughts, exchanged when Charles was preoccupied with financial markets. Charles's lack of curiosity became Eleanor's most effective shield. The emails began to use the language of design structure, foundation, void, light as their secret code for discussing the deterioration of her marriage. Kyle saw her underlying sadness. Charles saw her only as an extension of his success. The threshold of intimacy was crossed 2 months into their secret life. Charles was on a red-eye to Beijing for a critical merger. Eleanor had lied, claiming she was at a tedious charity auction. Instead, she stood outside Kyle's loft office. Kyle met her by the freight elevator. "I thought we could skip the formality," Kyle said, his voice low, "and maybe order Thai instead of reviewing the schematic." The schematic was forgotten almost immediately. They sat among rolls of blueprints, the city lights bleeding through the industrial windows. The conversation was heavy, laced with subtext. Kyle spoke of his childhood vulnerabilities. Eleanor spoke of the profound loneliness of being married to a ghost, the emotional exhaustion of living with a man who calculated everything but felt nothing. Then came the touch. Eleanor reached for a fallen pencil. Kyle reached for it too. Their fingers brushed. The accidental contact felt violently intentional, and Eleanor's breath hitched. Kyle pulled his hand back, but his eyes never left hers. All the contained energy of the last 2 months exploded in that glance. "Eleanor," Kyle whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of regret and fierce need. "I can't pretend this is about architecture anymore. I haven't been able to think about a single project properly since that symposium." "I know," she managed. The single word an agonizing confession, a surrender and an absolution all at once. He closed the remaining distance, and the kiss was overwhelming, a desperate, consuming act that validated every single suppressed feeling she had endured. It was the antithesis of Charles's sterile affections. It was consuming, messy, and demanded her presence. It was the first time in years she felt entirely seen. The sheer magnitude of the transgression forced them to separate that night. Eleanor rushed home in a cab, feeling physically sick with guilt, yet vibrating with an unbearable, forbidden joy. She saw Charles's photo on the mantelpiece, a staunch, loyal man whose trust she had just violated with terrifying ease. The following weeks were a tightrope walk. Their meetings became explicitly intimate, moving beyond the office to a discreet studio space. The secrecy was the most powerful aphrodisiac, the shared risk forging a bond deeper and more thrilling than the one she shared with Charles. Eleanor became a skilled purveyor of untruths. She began wearing a new, brighter perfume, a scent Charles failed to recognize. She started laughing more easily, a genuine laugh that Charles, engrossed in his market updates, took as proof that her gallery project was yielding positive emotional returns. But the facade was fragile. One morning, she left her phone unattended on the kitchen island. Charles walked past, pausing. He saw a message preview pop up from Kyle, "Thinking about you. I can still taste that whiskey ... double quotes." It was a small, ambiguous message, easily explained away. But Charles's hypervigilant mind flagged it. He did not pick up the phone. He did not confront her. But the easy, absolute trust he had always extended to Eleanor retreated into a cold, calculating corner of his mind. Later that night, as Eleanor slept soundly beside him, Charles was wide awake. He didn't notice the new perfume. He noticed the profound statistical anomaly in her behavior. The thrill of the forbiddance had blinded Eleanor to the true cost of her freedom. Charles, however, was about to begin his cold, analytical assessment of the breach. Eleanor's reality had fractured. The guilt, having lost its initial sting, had become a manageable pressure. sustained only by the rush of adrenaline from her clandestine meetings. Her existence was now a precarious balancing act between two distinct, non-overlapping realities. The pressure of maintaining this facade was immense, far more exhausting than the apathy of her marriage. The greatest threat was no longer her conscience, but the logistical impossibility of keeping the two worlds apart. The moment of profound terror arrived during a conversation with Charles about his firm's expansion. Charles was preparing a significant bid for a new mixed-use residential and commercial tower near Battery Park, a multi-million-dollar undertaking that would define the next decade of Sterling capital. "I'm interviewing architects this week," Charles announced over dinner, meticulous in separating the grilled asparagus. "Needs someone innovative, but with a track record of meeting deadlines. No dreamers, just deliverers." Eleanor nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. "One of the names that's kept coming up is Helix Design," Charles continued, tapping his fork on the table. "Young guy, Kyle Sterling. Impressive portfolio." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, the carefully prepared risotto tasting like ash. She gripped the edge of the marble table, trying to conceal the tremor in her hands. "Kyle Sterling?" she asked, her voice dangerously thin. "That's the one. Do you know him from the gallery circuit? He seems to have his hands in everything." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Vaguely. We met at the Columbia Symposium. Very cutting edge, but I've heard they can be ambitious with their pricing." She attempted to introduce doubt, subtly trying to redirect him without appearing overly invested. Charles looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Ambitious is good. Ambitious means they believe they're worth the fee. I'll take ambition over mediocrity every time." A week later, Kyle called her with the explosive news. "We got the meeting, Eleanor. The main presentation for Sterling Capital is next Tuesday. If we land this, it changes everything for Helix." Eleanor was consumed by nausea. "Kyle, you can't. This is too close. You're entering his professional sphere. If Charles connects the dots, if anything slips out, he'll destroy you, professionally and personally. He is ruthless." Kyle, high on the thrill of the chase, was dismissive. "I'm a professional, Elle. This is business. Charles is looking for the best, and I can separate the two. Besides," he lowered his voice, "think of the thrill. We'll be working in the same ecosystem. We'll practically be under the same roof." Eleanor realized that the thrill had become Kyle's new guiding principle, just as it had become hers. But for Charles, the entire system was sacred. She attempted to warn Charles again that weekend in the Hamptons. They walked near the bluffs, the cold Atlantic wind whipping their hair. "Charles, I really think you should reconsider Helix Design," Eleanor said, hugging her coat tighter. "They're too much of a risk. You need someone established, someone predictable." Charles stopped, facing the water. "Risk is only risk if you don't calculate it, Eleanor. I've done my due diligence. And frankly," he said, turning, "Kyle seems to understand the concept of structure and vulnerability better than any of the old guard." Eleanor froze. Charles had used the exact terminology Kyle had employed during their symposium debate. Had Kyle mentioned her, or was this a terrifying, unavoidable coincidence? The convergence intensified. Charles invited Kyle and his lead project manager to their penthouse for a pre-contractual discussion and social assessment. The dinner was agonizing. Eleanor played the perfect hostess, her composure rigid. She watched the two men, her husband and her lover, discussing multi-million-dollar deals over expensive wine. Kyle was charm itself, professional and confident. Charles was in his element, testing, prodding, assessing his business partner. When Kyle excused himself, Charles leaned toward Eleanor. "He's good, but he's a little too intense, wouldn't you say? Almost too present." Eleanor forced a shrug. "Maybe he just wants the job, Charles." "Maybe," Charles said, but his eyes narrowed with calculation. "Or maybe he's hiding something." The dinner concluded with handshakes. The two worlds had not only collided, they had merged. Kyle was now officially part of the Sterling machine. Eleanor was left standing between them, realizing her private guilt was now an active, financial threat to her husband's empire and her lover's career. The structure was sound, but the foundation was rotten. Charles was about to uncover the rot. Charles Sterling did not trust coincidence. He trusted verifiable data. The faint, citrusy scent on Eleanor's clothing, the acceleration of the hidden messages, and her uncharacteristic lobbying against. Helix design all were variables being processed in the intricate equation of his mind. The Queen message, though deleted by Eleanor, existed as a digital ghost in the cloud, whispering betrayal. His investigation was systematic and entirely emotionless. He didn't erupt in fury. He collected evidence like a forensic accountant. He began by filtering our shared financial statements, finding several anomalous dinner charges near the meatpacking district that conflicted precisely with Eleanor's claimed work appointments. The most telling clue came from a subtle shift in Eleanor's routine that only a decade of observation could detect. She had begun listening obsessively to a particular genre of melancholic indie rock music she had always dismissed as too emotionally needy. Charles found the playlist and noted the timestamps. She played it most often between 7 and 9 in the evening, precisely when he was traveling or immersed in his home office. Then came the physical evidence. Charles was packing for a quick trip to Miami. He reached into the pocket of a blazer Eleanor had recently taken to the dry cleaners and felt a tiny, rough object. He pulled it out, a small, dark wood shaving, clearly from a construction site or carpenter's workshop. To Charles, whose wife was surrounded by the finished smoothness of gallery pieces, this was a profound, undeniable inconsistency. He knew Kyle, the architect, frequented construction sites. The amalgamation of data descent, the financial anomalies, the unusual music, and the physical evidence provided Charles with a 99.9% certainty. His internal model for their marriage had reached total system failure. The core asset was compromised. His reaction remained chillingly composed. He determined the confrontation would occur on his terms, within his sphere of power and when the stakes were highest. The day before the next major meeting with Helix Design, Charles retrieved the deleted Queen text message from their shared cloud service. He read it again, carefully noting the exact wording, which confirmed the emotional depth of the affair. Charles didn't need to read any more. The emotional truth was secondary. The professional risk was primary. He would not allow his personal failure to destabilize his firm. That evening, Charles returned home, acting utterly normal. He brought Eleanor a rare bottle of Barolo, a calculated gesture of final false affection. "To us," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "And to the Helix project. Big things are coming." Eleanor, relieved by his apparent ignorance, drank deeply. Charles watched her, his expression utterly benign. But in his mind, he was already drafting the termination letter for both the architectural contract and their marriage. Later that night, as Eleanor slept soundly beside him, Charles was wide awake. He felt no anger. He felt the violation of a sacred contract. He looked at Eleanor, seeing not his wife, but the central, corrupt node of a massive deception. He knew he couldn't simply divorce her. He needed to expose the deception in a way that protected his professional image, while destroying their secret world. He had to turn the betrayal into a documented, unassailable fact. The confrontation would happen the next day in his boardroom where he held every advantage. The emotional cost was due, and Charles was the collector. A masterclass in premeditated, calculated cruelty, meticulously orchestrated by Charles in the controlled environment of the Sterling Capital boardroom. This was not a messy confrontation. It was the clinical termination of two contracts, one professional, one marital. Charles had summoned Eleanor to the office, claiming urgent paperwork. Simultaneously, he had called Kyle in for what he described as a crucial final review before the official contract announcement. The three of them took their places at the long mahogany table. Charles began the meeting with chilling professionalism, thanking Kyle for his firm's exceptional work. Eleanor watched, confused, wondering if Charles had somehow decided to ignore his suspicions. "However," Charles stated, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, lethal register, "I've come to a final decision. I regret to inform you, Mr. Sterling, that we will not be moving forward with your firm." Kyle's professional smile evaporated. "Charles, what? Why?" "Our designs are flawless." "The design is flawless, Kyle," Charles interrupted, meeting his eye. The foundation, however, is irrevocably compromised. In finance, we deal in risk assessment. And my most critical asset is trust. When that asset is corrupted, the entire structure is deemed insolvent. Charles then turned the large display screen from the architectural rendering to a single, devastating image, the recovered text message from Kyle to Eleanor. It was clean, digital proof displayed in a font the size of a newspaper headline. The silence in the room was absolute, punctuated only by the low hum of the ventilation system. Kyle was the first to react, rising, his chair scraping violently across the polished floor. "This is unconscionable, Charles. This is a private matter. You can't use this." "I absolutely can." Charles cut him off, leaning forward, his voice a dangerous whisper. "You entered my professional sphere. Kyle, you willingly chose to negotiate a multi-million-dollar contract with the man whose wife you were attempting to sleep with. That shows poor judgment, a profound lack of ethics, and an unforgivable disregard for risk management. I don't partner with people who are fundamentally dishonest. You're formally fired." Furthermore, Charles looked directly at Kyle's project manager. "I advise your employees to distance themselves from you immediately. A man who risks his entire firm for a brief, illicit affair is a liability to everyone around him." Charles then turned his full, icy gaze onto Eleanor. "As for you, Eleanor, our marriage, like this contract, is terminated due to an explicit breach of trust. You can leave now. Your belongings will be handled by my attorney." He stood up, walking toward the window, his back to them, ending the discussion with absolute brutal finality. Eleanor rose mechanically, overwhelmed not by sadness, but by searing humiliation. She looked at Kyle, expecting a gesture, a word of defense, but Kyle was already on his phone, his face a mask of panic, desperately trying to salvage his business reputation, which Charles had just detonated. The intoxication of the affair had been replaced by the cold, devastating reality. Eleanor walked out of the office and into the New York evening. When she finally arrived at the penthouse, hours later, the apartment was empty. Charles's possessions, his expensive suits, his personal toiletries were gone. On her vanity, next to her discarded wedding ring, was a small, personalized note. "The deed is clear. The apartment is yours for now. The safe code remains the same. The choices you made filled a void, Eleanor, but they emptied our structure. Decide what you want to build next, but do not ask me to be part of the scaffolding. I need silence." "Charles?" Eleanor sank onto the edge of their immaculate bed, the cold metal of the ring a heavy, meaningless weight in her hand. She had her freedom, but she had paid the ultimate price. The perfect, polished facade of her life was gone, replaced by the debris of two men's careers and her own self-respect. The phone buzzed. It was Kyle. She looked at the screen, the name a painful reminder of the reckless abandon that led her here. She didn't answer. She walked to her studio, pulling the linen cover off the large, blank canvas. The urge to paint was back, raw and overwhelming, fueled by the complex agony of her situation. She picked up a brush, her hand trembling. The void was still there, but now it demanded to be filled with the painful, complicated truth. She stood staring at the canvas, the city lights shimmering outside, the door to the apartment unlocked. She was alone amidst the ruins. The story had ended, but her life, standing amidst the wreckage, had just begun.